If you have money sitting in a regular savings account right now, there's a number you probably haven't checked in a very long time. And that number could be quietly costing you hundreds of dollars every year. Not because your bank is stealing from you, not because you've made some terrible financial mistake, and not because you need to become an investing expert. It's much simpler than that. It's the interest rate your money is actually earning. Here's an example. Imagine you have $20,000 sitting in a traditional savings account. At a rate of roughly 0.5%, that money isn't doing very much. At 0.5%, you're earning about $100 a year. But competitive high-yield savings accounts can offer rates several times higher. At 4%, that same $20,000 would generate about $800 in interest over a year before taxes and assuming the rate stayed constant. That's a $700 difference in 1 year. And the uncomfortable question is this: how many years have you allowed that difference to continue simply because you never checked? Because this isn't really a story about finding some secret bank account. It's a story about something much quieter. Inertia. Your money went into an account years ago. You got used to seeing it there. Your paycheck still arrives. Your debit card still works. Your bills still get paid. Nothing feels broken. So you never had a reason to stop and ask, is this actually the best place for this money? And that is exactly where the problem begins. Because over 10 or 20 years, a small difference in what your money earns can become a much larger difference in what you eventually have. So today, we're going to look at the number your bank isn't going to call you about. Why moving your money feels harder than it actually is. The quiet fees that can make the problem worse, and 5 simple moves that can close the gap. And none of them require you to become a different kind of person with money. Let's start with the simplest question. What is your savings account actually paying you? Not what you think it pays. Not what it paid 5 years ago. Not what your bank's advertising suggests. The actual APY attached to the account where your money is sitting right now. Because this is where personal finance advice often gets too vague. People are told to save more, build an emergency fund, keep 3 to 6 months of expenses, all good advice. But there's a step that often gets skipped. Once you've saved the money, where is it sitting? Because that matters. The national average savings rate can be far below what competitive high-yield savings accounts offer. Those numbers change over time. Rates move up, rates move down. And not every high-yield account is identical, but the gap can still be large enough that it's worth checking. Let's go back to that $20,000 example. At 0.5%, you're looking at about $100 a year. At 4%, you're looking at about $800 a year. That's not a life-changing amount in 1 year, but that's also the wrong way to think about it, because you're not making this decision once. You're making it every year the money stays there. And if the money is sitting there for 10 or 20 years, the difference can become much more meaningful. For example, if you simply left $20,000 untouched for 20 years, the result would be dramatically different depending on the rate. At around 0.6%, assuming the rate stayed constant and interest compounded annually, you'd end up with roughly $22,600. At 4%, you'd be around $43,800. That's a difference of more than $21,000. Now, real life won't look exactly like that. Rates change. People add and withdraw money. Taxes matter, and you shouldn't assume today's 4% rate will remain 4% for 20 years. That's not the point. The example simply makes one thing obvious. Where you keep your money matters. And here's where I want to be fair to banks. This isn't a conspiracy. Your bank isn't required to find the highest paying account in America for you. Banks are businesses. They have operating costs. They have different products, and they have no particular reason to encourage you to move your savings somewhere else. That's different from saying they're secretly stealing your money. They're not. The more accurate description is much less dramatic. They're not necessarily going to remind you that you have alternatives. And that's where responsibility comes back to you. Because if your account is paying almost nothing, the question isn't, why didn't my bank warn me? The better question is, why haven't I checked? And the answer to that question has a lot more to do with psychology than mathematics. If the difference can be this obvious, why don't people move their money? Because moving it feels like work, even when it isn't. Think about what happens when you open a bank account. You get a login, you get a debit card, your paycheck gets connected, your bills get connected, maybe your mortgage is connected, your banking app becomes familiar. You've used the same bank for 10, 15, maybe 20 years. At some point, the bank stops feeling like a financial decision. It just becomes part of the background of your life. And that's where status quo bias enters the picture. We tend to prefer the arrangement we already have over making a change, even when the alternative might be better. Not because we're irrational, because changing things has friction. You have to research, compare, open something, move money, check the terms, make sure everything works. And when you're busy with a job, kids, parents, bills, and everything else life throws at you, that task can feel surprisingly easy to postpone. Tomorrow, next weekend, after the holidays, when work slows down, and suddenly 3 years have passed. But here's the part many people misunderstand. You don't necessarily have to leave your bank. You don't have to close your checking account. You don't have to change your debit card. You don't have to rebuild your entire financial life. If your goal is simply to earn more on money that doesn't need to be used every day, one option is to keep your everyday banking where it is and compare separate savings accounts for your emergency fund or other cash savings. And if you choose a high-yield savings account, make sure you understand what kind of account it is, whether it's at an FDIC-insured bank, and what the applicable insurance limits and terms are. That distinction matters. Don't chase a higher number without checking what you're actually getting. Because a higher APY is useful only when the account fits your needs and the terms make sense. And this brings us to another quiet place where money can disappear. Because interest isn't the only number worth checking. Open your bank statement. Look carefully, not just at your balance. Look at the little charges. Monthly maintenance fees, minimum balance fees, overdraft-related charges, account service fees. Maybe they're small, $5, $10, $15. A small charge doesn't feel important. That's exactly why it can survive for years. Imagine a $10 monthly fee. That's $120 a year. Over 5 years, that's $600. And that's before considering what that money could have earned if it had stayed in your account or been put somewhere productive. The amount isn't necessarily devastating. The pattern is the problem. Because the most expensive financial mistakes aren't always dramatic. Sometimes they're boring, a small charge, a slightly lower interest rate, a forgotten account feature, a promotional rate that ended, a minimum balance requirement you stopped paying attention to. Each one feels too small to deal with today, and collectively, they can become expensive. There's another reason to review the terms periodically. The account you opened 5 years ago may not be the account you would choose today. And that's true even if nothing about your financial life has changed. Your bank's product lineup changes, competitors change, rates change, fees change, your own needs change. So the fact that an account was a good choice years ago doesn't automatically make it a good choice today. And this is why I want you to think about your savings account differently. Don't think of it as something you opened once. Think of it as a financial tool that deserves an occasional review, because once you start looking at these small differences, you begin to see something bigger. The real cost isn't necessarily this year. Let's say you look at your account today and discover you're earning less than you could elsewhere. You might think, okay, so I'm missing a few $100s a year. Not a huge deal, and in isolation, you're right. But personal finance is almost never about 1 year. It's about repetition. A small difference repeated for 10 years is no longer small. Repeated for 20 years, it can become significant. Let's take that same $20,000. If you could earn 4% instead of around 0.6%, and the rate somehow stayed unchanged for 20 years, the difference on that original $20,000 alone would be roughly $21,000. Again, real life won't be that clean. Rates change. You may need the money. You may add to it. You may move some of it into other investments. This isn't a promise that you'll earn 4% for 20 years. It's a demonstration of something much simpler. The rate attached to your money matters, and it matters even more when you're consistently adding to that balance. Imagine you're putting $300 a month into savings. If that money is consistently earning more over a long period, the difference can become much larger because you're not only earning on your original money, you're earning on accumulated interest too. That's the part people often miss. They think, it's only another $20 this month. But $20 repeated over years isn't $20 anymore. And that's the broader lesson. You've probably spent years learning how to save. You've learned to automate contributions. You've learned to avoid spending everything you earn. You've learned to build an emergency fund. Those are difficult habits. But imagine doing all of that correctly and then leaving the money in an account that barely rewards you for keeping it there. That's the quiet mistake. Not saving too little, not spending too much, saving the money, and then never checking whether the money is actually working. And fortunately, this is one of the easier financial problems to fix. You don't need a new personality. You don't need a complicated investment strategy. You need a review. So let's make this practical. If you only do 5 things after watching this video, make them these. Number 1, check your actual APY. Open your banking app. Find the savings account. Find the APY. Don't guess. Write the number down, because until you know the number, everything else is just theory. Number 2, compare it with current alternatives. Look at competitive savings accounts available to you. Compare the APY, but don't stop there. Check whether the account is FDIC insured if that matters to you. Check minimum balances, check fees, check withdrawal and transfer policies. Check whether the advertised rate has conditions. Don't compare one number. Compare the whole account. Number 3, find out what your account has actually cost you. Look through the last 12 months. How much interest did you earn? How much did you pay in fees? If the number surprises you, that's useful information, not something to feel guilty about, because now you have something concrete to act on. Number 4, separate everyday banking from savings when it makes sense. Your checking account exists for convenience. Your savings account exists for money you're not spending today. Those 2 jobs don't necessarily require the same account. You can evaluate them separately. Keep the banking setup that works for your daily life. Then make sure your longer-term cash savings aren't sitting somewhere simply because you've always kept them there. Number 5, put a reminder on your calendar. Once a year. That's it. Pick a date. Maybe your birthday. Maybe the first weekend of January. Maybe the day you review your insurance. Once a year, ask yourself, is my savings account still competitive? Because the account that was competitive when you opened it may not be competitive 5 years later. And the point isn't to constantly move money around chasing every tiny rate change. The point is to avoid disappearing into inertia for another decade. Here's what I want you to remember from this. Your bank isn't necessarily doing anything wrong. And you don't need to be angry at your bank. The problem is much quieter than that. Your money can become invisible to you. You see the balance, you see the same account, you see the same login, and because nothing appears to be broken, you stop asking whether the setup is still working as hard as it could. That's the real danger of financial inertia. It doesn't feel like a mistake. It feels like normal life. And that's why the simplest question in this entire video might also be the most valuable. What is my money actually earning right now? If you don't know, find out today. Not tomorrow. Not when you have more time. Open the app, find the APY, look at the fees, and then compare. You may discover that your account is perfectly fine. That's a useful answer too, because now you know. Or you may discover that your money has been sitting in the same place for years simply because you never had a reason to question it. And if that's what you find, don't beat yourself up. You don't need to fix 20 years of financial inertia in one afternoon. You just need to make one better decision now. Then make it easier to repeat. That's how quiet financial improvements work. They're rarely dramatic. They're usually small decisions that stop costing you money over and over again. So let me ask you something. Do you know the exact APY your savings account is paying you right now? If you checked it while watching this video, tell me the number in the comments. Not your balance, just the rate. Because I think you'll be surprised by how many people have absolutely no idea what their own number is. And if this video helped you look at your money a little differently, subscribe. We're not trying to become obsessed with money here. We're trying to make sure the money we've already worked hard to save isn't quietly working against us. Take care of your money. And every once in a while, stop and ask whether it's actually working as hard as you are.